We have cat. My gosh. Hey, Paul.
Hey, Kent, how's it going?
Oh, I'm sorry. I got to change. Hang on. I got to change my audio here. Okay, that's better. I'll say something. Maybe I can hear you this time.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. It helps
Okay.
when I play the speaker.
Good deal.
Put this over on this screen. Oh, come on. Okay, we have admin and us.
I'm here. It's Kathy.
Yeah. I said hi, but I couldn't hear anything you might have said because I didn't have my speaker plugged in. So you're not in the field restoring a cabin or something?
I am.
You cut out. You cut yourself off. So Paul, I saw your picture with the rest of the staff in the Historical Society conference announcement. That was kind of cool.
Yeah, pretty cool. I agree.
I would love to come to that, but I got limited resources and I'm already committed to a conference later in the year elsewhere. So yeah.
Well, anything in view is always going to be a good conference, right? Should be.
Yeah. It looks like a really interesting program. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Got everybody who's anybody. Oh, there's the answer. Kathy's out tromping in the woods. And where are you?
Oh my God, she's a bivouac size. Oh, look out.
Oh, look out.
You're
Unmute. You're still on mute.
There we go.
There we
How's
go.
that?
That's good.
Yes.
I'm at double arrow lookout near Sealy Lake.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Yeah. So I'm going to shut my video back off, but I'll have the audio on.
Okay. Well, thank you for the little panorama of your setting. That was kind of cool.
It's very pretty. Very smoky, but very pretty.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you could join us. Thank you. Okay. Well, since we're not live in terms of actual participation yet, let me ask you a question, Paul. In the minutes, should we all be referenced as commission members or committee members? I see that the word committee was used, but committees are part of the commission, but what's your thought?
I would think it would be commission member.
Yeah, okay. That's and the other thing I'm going to do as well during the minute review is the fact that I don't mind being identified. It looks like Elizabeth went out of her way not to identify when I make comments. So since the public is identified, I think there's every reason why we should be as well. But That's something I was going to bring up as well. There's Elizabeth. I have to say, Elizabeth, I'm almost sorry I showed up at the meeting place for our last meeting because nobody could see me. We were in that room and I had to practically wave my hand to be seen, whereas the Zoom folks were chatting away and being recognized and so forth. So yeah. Oh, Jackson's with us. There's Jim.
Hi, everybody.
Hey.
Hello.
I was just commenting to Paul, it's nice to see the picture of you and your staff in that brochure for the conference.
Yeah.
I got mine the other day. It's like, oh, there they are. I wish I could go, but I'm otherwise committed further in the year, so should be fun though. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Oh, Patrick's on too. Okay. So Elizabeth, anything to add before we start? Elizabeth and I were just in another meeting and she zoomed in. I attended in person, and so this is at least a second Zoom meeting for today.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. There's two. You have two squares on the screen.
Yeah, I should. That's correct. I'm having all sorts of technical right now.
Okay. Well, we can hear you.
Two squares on the screen and talking to you through my phone. So.
Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. Well, I think we're ready to start. Good evening. I'm Kent Watson, Chair of the Historic Preservation Commission. The Historic Preservation Commission is charged with establishing a local historic preservation program, integrating historical preservation into local, state, and federal planning and decision-making processes. The Historic Preservation Program is designed to promote the preservation of historic and prehistoric sites, structures, objects, buildings, and historic districts. The Historic Preservation Commission is composed of volunteers from Missoula's neighborhoods, businesses, and preservation professionals, and was established by the City Council in 1989. I'd like to thank any from the public who are joining us for our meeting that we're holding by Zoom. Relative to any public comment, when I call for public comment, please raise and lower your hand feature to let me know you wish to be recognized. I will allow you to talk. Actually, our staff will allow you to talk, and you'll need to unmute your mic. You have joined us. If you've joined us by phone today, you can raise and lower your hand by pressing *9 and mute and unmute using *6. If you are participating by phone, I'll call on you by reading the last 4 digits of your phone number. And if you are participating by computer, I'll call the name that was listed when you entered our webinar. So thank you for joining us. Staff, if you could conduct roll call.
Steve Adler,
Here.
Kathy Beckenhauser,
Here.
Paul Felicity,
Here.
Lee Fredrickson is absent. Patrick Swart,
Here.
John Sheaf is absent. Kent Watson,
Here.
Jackson Hill.
Here.
Okay,
We have a
we have a
quorum.
quorum. Thank
Did
you.
you Did you ask for me? I didn't.
Oh, Jim's here.
Jim's here. James McDonald.
Yeah, make sure that's noted.
Yes, it is noted. Sorry, did I skip that?
I think so. I don't know.
But I marked you present.
Okay, we're moving on to the minutes. Do others have any comments on the minutes? There's a couple things I just wanted to bring up, but I yield the floor to anyone else who have any comments on the minutes. Okay, what I wanted to suggest is that on the okay, I'm looking at the old business. This is the presentation on the Fort Missoula Post Hospital, and it starts off stating a committee member made a comment. That was me. And since we recognize others who call in from the public by name, I think I should be recognized as the commission member. I think commission member would be the appropriate thing. Basically, where I stated that when it comes back to the HPC, and I think it's more, I think probably, even if I said it this way, it's more proper to say will likely recuse himself because of potential conflict of interest. And the last sentence there about the nonprofits is a little misleading. The nonprofits are interested in preservation of the Knife River ponds nearby and the natural habitat areas adjacent to the hospital. And they're not really, the nonprofits are not suggesting that the hospital should preserve the ponds. So I just wanted to make sure that was clarified. Other than that, just the general suggestion is I think anytime that one of us is making a comment, I think it's appropriate for us to be mentioned if it's a substantive comment. And I think we ought to be recognized as commission members since that's what we are. Does anybody else have any comments on the minutes? Do I hear a motion to approve as amended?
So moved.
Thank you, Steve.
Second, this is Paul.
Second by Paul. All in favor? Aye.
All right.
Thank you. Moving right along in our agenda now, we have a very light meeting. This is the item on the agenda for public comment. If we have anyone who's tuned in who wishes to make a comment on anything that we don't already have on the agenda, this is the time to be recognized so that you can make that comment. Seeing none, hearing none. There we go. Staff has put up the appropriate instructions for people that might be interested in making a comment. And we will make this opportunity available as we move through the agenda. But this is the time when anybody is available or who's online wishes to comment about something that we don't already have on the agenda. Okay, moving right on to new business. Here we're going to have item 5.1, special presentation and discussion, Missoula City Cemetery Strategic Plan. No motion is required. And I'm delighted to welcome Jeremy Keene, our Public Works Director.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Members of the commission. My name is Jeremy Keene. I'm the Director for Public Works and Mobility with the City of Missoula. Nice to see all of you. I just have a brief presentation on our strategic plan that we did for the cemetery. It's okay, I'll share my screen. I was a little surprised when I came to work for the city about 2.5 years ago that cemetery is part of the Public Works Department. So I've been able to learn a lot about cemetery in the last couple of years, and it's been kind of a pleasant surprise learning more about the city cemetery and what it does and how we take care of it, and really the kind of amazing historic asset that we have there. So one of the things that we did pretty early on was we started looking at a strategic plan, recognizing that we hadn't done that in the cemetery for quite a long time. And there were a lot of questions about where the cemetery was headed and where we needed to be investing resources and time. So we hired an outfit called LF Sloan Group out of Minnesota, I believe. Larry and Will Sloan, father and son team, specialize in cemetery work and just did a really fantastic job for us, taking a look at the cemetery and national cemetery trends, where things are headed, and gave us a lot of good things to think about. That plan was adopted earlier this year by City Council, and it's more of it's a guideline, gives us direction where to go. It doesn't make specific decisions, but it's helpful to look at how we go about decision making with our budget process and with other decisions that have to be made around the cemetery. So it's available on our website. That's what you're seeing here. This is the city website. You can look for cemetery strategic plan, and here's the link down here at the bottom if you'd like to look at the whole report. I'm just going to share a couple of excerpts from it. Just give you a couple of the highlights. So the plan was intended to take a look at future operation of the cemetery, evaluate our infrastructure conditions and needs, identify long-term land use needs with the cemetery, and identify community values, the other things that the cemetery does for the community. Really thinking about how we ensure that the cemetery remains relevant and sustainable. The plan was created with input from staff, the cemetery board, lot owners, as in plot owners at the cemetery, and local funeral industry professionals. And it was, like I said, it was approved by City Council earlier this year. So, one of the things that they highlighted in this plan was the headwinds that the cemetery business in general is up against. So, and Montana is no different than other places around the country. We're just seeing less use of cemeteries, less burials. So in the US, the cremation rate was 5% in 1970. And in 2019, it had grown to 55% nationally. In Montana, it's 75%. 75% of people are choosing cremation. So when you look at that in terms of the number of casket burials and even the number of people that are choosing to use a cemetery for cremations, we're really, our market has shrunk considerably. And so combined with other headwinds, like the rise in mobility, people are more mobile, less attached to a specific community. We have more fractured families and increased longevity. So there's a lot of things that are trending against cemeteries that make it a little bit more difficult to make them work financially. So the cemetery really needs to leverage its role in the community as an institution and strive to become and stay relevant in the community. And that was really a big focus of this strategic plan and the recommendations that are in it. So the other thing that they took a good look at was a land analysis. And the cemetery has grown from the original 14 acres that were purchased in 1884 to about 80 acres in 1960. And currently we're using about 50 acres as developed and plotted cemetery land. So that's the area that's shown in purple there. There's about 30 acres of additional land that is being used for other purposes right now, but it was acquired for the cemetery back in the 50s and 60s. Our evaluation of this was that in looking at our burial trends, looking at what we've done in the past, our consultant felt that we had within this currently developed cemetery, we have about 200 years of capacity at current burial rates and current trends. So, so their recommendation was that we should look to divest in the excess land, that the land here in purple is enough land to sustain the cemetery for the long-term foreseeable future. They said they typically plan for about 20 years. So having 200 years was pretty good factor of safety in terms of making sure that we have enough land. So their recommendation is to divest of this excess land shown in green. They recommended keeping this red strip here as a little bit of a buffer and this area down to the south of the developed cemetery as an area that we could continue to use for other cemetery uses. And the recommendation was that, should that land be sold, that a portion of those proceeds be used to benefit the cemetery's needs. And some of the needs that we have at the cemetery are fencing and buffering. If you're familiar with it, you know that there's a lot of industrial use going on around the cemetery. And the recommendation was to create some better fencing and more landscaping to buffer those industrial uses. We also have some needs for infrastructure, buildings. The old chapel building really is not large enough and does not have facilities that really serve the current needs. The office building is too small and is really a kind of a hodgepodge of old remodels that doesn't work very well. And so the recommendation was to look to build a new structure or remodel one of these structures to provide space for office, restrooms, meeting space, a more modern facility. And finally, they really put a lot of emphasis on that idea of role and relevance in the community. And, you know, the idea of marketing relevancy, that creating a connection to the community results in more cemetery revenue as a cemetery. So people will choose to be buried in a cemetery if they have a connection to it, if they've spent time there, if they have some other reason for feeling like that's a special place. And so the idea is to embrace a wider audience, to you know, to bring in things like birding or an arboretum, and to really emphasize the historic significance of the cemetery. So they did recommend seeking a historic designation for the cemetery, and to, you know, increase the historic signing and interpretation of the historic cemetery. And we've started down that path. Elizabeth has been helping us take a look at that, looking at the process and looking at what the parameters would be for that designation. And we're on board with that idea. We think that's a great, it's a great way to make the cemetery relevant and recognize that historic value. So we're happy to participate in that and cooperate, and look forward to hearing your ideas on it. With that, I will be happy to take any questions.
Hello, this Kathy. I have a question. You had talked about buffering. Would it be, if you sold all the land, would that give you enough buffering? Or are you just talking about selling a portion of the land and using some of it as buffer?
Yeah, the buffering would come primarily in the form of fencing and landscaping that would create a better buffer, but also along those areas where we still own the land as cemetery land, that we could also create a space there that would also create a physical buffer.
Are there other questions?
Yeah, this is Steve. Were there any discussions of, say, long-term lease instead of selling the land? I know 200 years is a long ways out there, and it might be unreasonable to do like 100-year lease or 200-year leases. But I'm kind of looking at what other people's, namely the schools, have done. And at times when their projections were rather dire and they started selling off property 20, 30 years later, they found out they sure could have used that property again when demographics changed. And assuming demographics will change again in 200 years, was there any thought to keeping it in a back pocket, basically?
That was not discussed. It's certainly something we could talk about as we look closer at how to divest in that land. We haven't started that process yet. Obviously, we have a lot of demand in Missoula right now for housing, and that land has been looked at for housing. So we did do some environmental work on it to make sure that it didn't have any environmental constraints, and we did a phase 1 and a phase 2 environmental, and it came back relatively clean. So we do think it's possible to use that land for residential. I don't know if a 100-year lease would work for residential development or not. Those tend to be long-term developments as well. So.
If I could add to what Steve had said, and this is Kathy again, if it wasn't residential, because as Missoula's population increases, was that taken into account for the cemetery use? And again, you had said that we had 200 years, but is that at Missoula's population right now, or is that Missoula's population as predicted into the future? And I do understand that you guys have needs, but I do want to at least consider, you know, once that land is gone, it's gone.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with you. It's important to make those decisions carefully. But you know, the projections on cemetery use are based on Missoula's demographics and national trends. So only as good as your crystal ball, but things can certainly change, but that's just the way that things are headed in general with cemetery use and with people's choices on end of life decisions. So it's hard to say what will happen in 200 years.
I do very much like that you are looking into getting it listed. I hadn't really considered that it wasn't listed, so thank you for doing that.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, barely.
Okay, well,
Speak
it's
up.
oh boy, hang on.
Go ahead.
Okay. Is that any better?
Yeah, we can hear you okay.
All right. Before we got too much further in this, I did have just a couple minutes worth of talking about the National Register process and kind of where we're at with that. I apologize for not having video right now. I'm having a handful of technical problems. So really quickly before we move on, I have literally just a couple of slides here that kind of talk about what our next steps are for the nomination process. So as Jeremy mentioned, the plan considers really a multitude of ways to keep the cemetery relevant. And one of the most relevant recommendations, obviously, to the work that we do and the HPC does is the suggestion to pursue the National Register designation. So over the last really handful of weeks, I've met with a few members of the cemetery board, Jeremy, and then a few others from city staff to discuss the potential nomination. And I've also been in contact with the folks at the State Historic Preservation Office to kind of take a look at what that nomination might look like if we continue to move forward. After reviewing some of the information with Jeremy just this past week that we received from them, I've kind of started to put together what the process looks like if we continue to move forward. So when I say I have just a couple slides, I mean that quite literally. This will just show you kind of what we're looking at. So the folks from the State Historic Preservation Office, of course, being quite familiar with the property, do believe that it is eligible for listing as a historic district. That said, the nomination will use the proposed boundaries that you see here outlined in orange. These boundaries were determined using the available land acquisition information, which says that all of the land in the outlined areas was acquired for cemetery use between 1884 and the mid-1950s, as Jeremy had said. We had originally suggested possibly using a smaller boundary with this, but when the land acquisition records revealed that this northernmost section and a good chunk of this part right here were all acquired in the same transaction, SHPO felt it best if we use the boundaries that you see that I've outlined here. So really the next steps, this is essentially the bulk of my presentation right here, is just to kind of walk everyone through, and for those who may be watching, what the process actually looks like to get it listed. So the biggest task, of course, is drafting the nomination. We will have to work to really put together, using all of the available historical resources, the full story of the cemetery and kind of its significance to the community and how it's connected to the growth and development of Missoula. Creating the requisite maps that they require to kind of show how the land was acquired throughout the cemetery's history, and then going around and taking high resolution digital photographs. This will be kind of a combined process right now when we have the opportunity, as you can see in this top photo here, to really capture the full canopy effect that is kind of at the heart of the cemetery's landscape. But then also coming back perhaps a little bit later when we can get better kind of wide angle shots of the cemetery that show it without quite so much foliage if possible. After that, I'll go through and draft a full nomination for the State Historic Preservation Office to review. This will go through what will presumably be a kind of lengthy revise and resubmit process until we get a finalized nomination that's ready to be scheduled for the State Review Board meeting. That State Review Board only meets 3 times a year, in January, May, and September. Since we are a certified local government, we have a mandatory 60-day notice requirement to give interested parties the opportunity to comment before the nomination goes before the review board. So we're realistically trying to aim for the January review board meeting, which means that the final nomination will need to be complete and approved by SHPO no later than November. So that's just kind of where we're at with the process right now. I've kind of started the early stages of research and been working through that while getting us kind of figuring out what the process looks like and if we want to move forward with it. The next step will be for me to work with the folks in the cemetery board and anyone else who's interested in participating in the process from the HPC to put together an initial draft and begin getting feedback from SHPO as soon as possible. So I just wanted to make sure that we had that part of the presentation put in there too, so that if you guys have questions or concerns about the nomination process itself, that we could address those at the same time before we moved on to the next agenda item. But we'll certainly keep y'all updated as we move through the process in future HPC meetings. So that's all I've got.
Got a strange question because it's a cemetery. When we're talking about ownership, do individual owners own their plots, or is the city considered the owner?
For the purposes of this, the city is considered the owner. Jeremy could probably speak to the individual ownership within the cemetery, but the city owns the overall land, so they're considered the owner for the property.
Yeah, because I was just wondering if anybody actually has a right to object, and who that would be if we're facing. Because I was just thinking, if I were a plot owner, would I have a right? Or would that be given to the city because they manage the cemetery?
Admittedly, that's a good question. Jeremy or Paul?
Yeah, I don't know the answer either. When we sell plots, it does not change the underlying ownership of the parcel. So we're not creating new legal parcels, still city ownership. So I'm not exactly sure what rights are provided when you buy a plot.
Okay, and it being a cemetery, I'm kind of wondering, well, who's going to object? So,
You'd
sorry.
be surprised.
Oh,
No,
all them
because-
errors.
I know that if I own a plot in a cemetery, it's part of my homeowner's insurance policy, basically recognizing my ownership of that plot and possibly a gravestone. So I just was really unsure about the status of ownership of a plot and what rights that may or may not confer.
Yeah, I think if the actual, since the ownership of the land itself doesn't really change, it just stipulates that it can only be used for burial purposes, at least from the historic deeds I've been looking at. I
Okay,
would assume that, of course, anybody, within the community, I think, can pose an objection if they have one.
okay,
But I don't know how much it would change. The city is at least from the conversations I've had with SHPO, the city is the determining factor on whether or not we can put forth the nomination. So that's as far as the ownership question has come up so far.
okay. So effectively, the city is the owner.
Yes.
Okay.
Jeremy, what kind of interest, if any, has Parks had in the property in terms of is there a need for another north side, city park as opposed to obviously the cemetery served many in that regard, but I was kind of curious whether Parks had any particular interest one way or the other about the divestment process.
Yeah, we've talked a lot with Parks Department about park needs in this area. The neighborhood is short on park space, and we are looking to increase the park space. Right now, they have the White Pine Park, which is about 3 acres. They see the need for about 5 acres of park, and so we're looking at a larger park space. This excess land could be part of that solution. That's one of the locations we've looked at. And then I think the cemetery also serves as kind of a passive park space. It's open space that's open to the public, but it doesn't serve the same function as a park with ball fields or a playground or something like that.
I realize this is not really part of the strategic plan per se, and obviously having not read it, I don't know what it does say about this. And I'm thinking about some of the activities that go on out there. Is there actually within the staff operations right now, do they have sort of a program director, if you will, to corral the various activities that go on or to wrangle them as needed? Or is that just something that happens based upon what nonprofit comes in and has an interest in doing something?
Yeah, we do have staff at the cemetery office on a full-time basis, and they do coordinate events. We had a bike tour recently this spring, and they do a Memorial Day event, and then there's the Stories and Stones event, typically happens in the fall. So yeah, they do coordinate those things.
Anyone else have questions or comments regarding the plan and to have the opportunity to query Jeremy while he's with us?
I had a question for Elizabeth. This is Patrick.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm in the middle of moving and my place is a mess, so my camera's off as well.
That's okay.
Just out of curiosity, and considering listing the cemetery on the National Register, is there any concern that certain portions were surveyed relatively recently, like the late 70s and late 90s? Will those portions of the cemetery qualified, or is there concern that they won't?
That's actually something we brought up when we were trying to establish the boundaries. I actually took one of the cemetery maps from the website and kind of color coded it by year of land acquisition and provided SHPO with earliest burial dates, because I was struggling to put together the actual dates that the land was platted. But SHPO seems to have no concerns about that. They seem more concerned with the actual date of acquisition and when that land became part of the city cemetery itself. But I've been in contact with Scott, who's been helping me go through some of those records. And if that becomes an issue, we'll find out moving forward. But as of right now, a land acquisition seems to be the most important dates they're concerned with when determining the boundaries.
Yeah, that's right. And Sam mentioned that to me as well. We've received a few questions from the public over at the clerk and recorder's office about those surveys, and we've been digging through that. So if you need any help or assistance digging up historic surveys for the cemetery, I'm glad to help out if that comes up.
Sorry for saying Scott. Yeah, I meant Sam.
Oh, not a problem. He gets that all the time.
Yeah, I had a question about the 200-year projection. Is that based on current trends, or is that based on kind of a successful campaign to get the place recognized historically and increase the business and usership?
I think it's based on current trends and national trends. So, past our past numbers, they looked back at 10 years of our past history of how many burials we did every year. And then they also looked at what was happening, trends nationally and trends in Montana. So it's kind of it's a composite of the demographics and what we've seen in the past.
So if there is a successful campaign, basically, to get people more aware and get more people using the cemetery, that would predictably then shorten the 200 years.
Well, our real goal here with marketing the cemetery is to attract some of those other burial types, like cremation. And we've offered, we have these niche walls which allow for interment of those cremated ashes in a more affordable format and takes up a lot less space. So I think that we have a lot of room on the cemetery to accommodate different kinds of burials, and I think we want to increase our volume and our revenues by trying to move to the right places where the market is.
Sure.
Any further comments or questions on the matter? Anybody in the public that's out there wishes to ask a question or have a big comment? Seeing none, I think we've concluded this item. Thank you very much, Jeremy. It's kind of fun to, I know from my standpoint, get an education about what's going on out there. I never, the whole time that Doug was out there, I never got out to work to meet with him and see what was going on. Doug Waters. I mean, he sort of did a lot of things out there, I know, and so it's nice to know that things are moving on and going to be moving on towards that register documentation. So thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I encourage you, if you haven't been out there, to go out for a walk. The staff just does a beautiful job out there of keeping it looking good and kept up. And I'd also encourage you to take a look at the strategic plan on the website, because it's a good report and has a lot of good information in it. Thanks for having me tonight.
Absolutely. Yeah, I need to get back out there. It's been a long time. So thanks for bringing it up and raising our level of awareness. That really helps a lot. All right, moving along. New business, we have item 5.2, and our own Paul Philisetti is going to fill us in on the status of the federal office building project. What's the latest on that and what's going on?
Okay, I have a slideshow I'm going to show here, I hope. Hopefully it's not going to be too burdensome. But I'll just go through this slide presentation. Hopefully you can all see my screen. So A&E has been working with both the city and county entities in terms of their looking to obtain the Missoula Federal Building, also the US Post Office, as a portion of the National Park Service Historic Surplus Property Program. And as you all know, the building was the it is still the Forest Service, or still the US Post Office, but the Forest Service has moved out as of, I think they moved out in 2013. Just to talk a little bit about the Historic Surplus Property Program. It's offered by the National Park Service through GSA, General Service Administration, which enables local governments, state, city, county, local governments to obtain historic buildings that are no longer used by the federal government at no cost. That idea of no cost is kind of a misnomer in terms of you get the building, but that's at the same time, there's some caveats that go along with that, and I'll talk about those. But the goal of the project is, the goal of the program is to get federal buildings that are no longer in use into public hands, that will preserve and protect the buildings in perpetuity of some nature. Under the program, MPS acts as a steward and oversees the application process, and just so happens on the federal building, there are covenants on the building that are that have been in place through agreements through GSA and the State Historic Preservation Office. So those will be a part of the program, as well as SOI standard, Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. And so that application process has been delivered to National Park Service as of last month. And so it's under review. And all indicators suggest that city and county will be the proud owner of the federal building, possibly in September of 2022. That application included several documents. It's a pretty lengthy process, but included a use plan, a preservation plan, which are two of the larger components amongst other financial plans that the county put together based on cost estimating that we did for the building renovating the building over a period of time. And again, just to reiterate that the building comes at no cost, but at the same time, there's an expectation that the new property owner will take care of the building, bring it up to code, seismic, et cetera, for whatever purpose and use they're going to be using it as. So just to jump in on the building a little bit, I should say that one other thing to say is that in terms of the historic property program, the building's designated a historic monument. And unlike national monuments that we think about, the term historic monument is a term that, statutory term that the application process, NPS and GSA have come across to identify these buildings as different than other buildings. So it's just a statutory name in terms of the application process. So you may hear that as this process moves forward. So here's a 1911 image of the building, the original building, constructed as a US Post Office and federal office on the second and third floor. This is taken on the northeast corner of Broadway and Patty Street. The government purchased the site, the building site, in 1907. And the original building here is attributed to James Knox Taylor. He's was a supervising architect of the US Treasury Department. And the style of the building is Italian Renaissance Revival, kind of a popular style at that era, during that era. And over the next 40 years, the building went through a series of 4 additions. And I'll get into a little bit more description of those, but it results in an overall square footage of the building about approximately 128,000 square feet. And as you know, the building is listed on the National Register as that listing was approved in 1979. It's one of the 62 individual listed properties in the city of Missoula. And as such, it will go through the HPC, HPO in terms of permitting, historic preservation permitting. So you will be involved in the future. And because there is so limited access to the building interior, I want to really focus in on that and show you some of the interior components of the building. And again, just to go through some of the expansion parts, the original building is this part here, 1911. There was an addition back here to the north side of that original building. In 1926, that added the federal courtrooms. 1927, this portion of the building is built to include office space for the Forest Service, and then and that includes the greenhouse that we'll see. 1935, the building's pretty much doubled in size and incorporates this portion of the building. And again, more office space. And then finally in 1952, there's an addition back here that's tucked in, which we'll see later on. So those are the components of the building. I'll go through kind of looking at those historically using some of these images. So here we see the 1911 building. This portion of the building, hopefully, I don't know if you can see my cursor, I believe it should be. But this portion of the building, and then to the north, the 1926 Federal Courthouse Edition. And off to the right is the 1927 edition, which would be the greenhouse. And then back here on the left, far left of this slide, you can see that 1935 edition that effectively doubles the size of the building. So let's start looking at some of the basement features. You get some images of the interior construction of the basement. You can see there's the door openings are kind of still exist. Some of the floor finishes exist and wall and base trim features exist. The ceilings are all drop ceilings, 2x4 acoustic ceilings. Some of the floor finishes have been carpeted over. And this detail image is intended to show there's a little bit of terrazzo floor finish underneath these layers of glues that are covering the carpets are covered by, or covering over. Again, looking at the corridors, pretty nondescript, not a lot of historic finishes there. Some of the door openings are in their original locations, and some of those doors are the original doors. The original staircases in the basement and throughout the building have in part been enclosed, so there's been modifications to those, including handrail modifications that we see later on. And again, looking at the building, fire sprinkler system has been added, some electrical has been added, surface mounted in most cases. So pretty random modifications in the building overall. Here you get to see some of the original ceiling height spaces and then some of that area that hasn't been covered over by the drop ceiling. So there's a lot of ductwork in those ceilings as well. The existing restrooms are there. However, they've been altered too. You can see here the sinks, original sinks have been removed and the ADA compliance has been tried to come in. Fixtures have changed out as well. In terms of, as well as the heating and cooling systems in the buildings, those are all new systems. Also want to point out in the basement, there's some water issues. We have a light well, extra light well, and there's some moisture issues that would be having to be dealt with as well. Want to look at the first floor then. As you come in the 1935 edition, this is the northwest corner of the building. This is the most historic and character defining features of the building aside from the post office. Here we see the entry lobby, some of the travertine finishes and terrazzo floors, marble base, and decorative ceiling trims and finishes, as well as light fixture. As soon as you exit that space, though, the finishes change pretty dramatically, and I'll show that in future slides here. Just wanted to jump to the 1927 edition, which is on the southeast corner of the building, facing Broadway. And this is looking from that entrance in the building towards Broadway. You can see the original arch and the original doors exist, but essentially everything inside the building, the interior of the building is new. These wall finishes, floor, treatments of our wall have carpet tile, and of course the ceilings are all acoustic ceilings. Next slide shows a detail of those original doors and some of the marble finishes and tile floor finishes that remain. So there are historic features in the building that hopefully we can retain and restore. And generally, though, the door condition here is a pretty accurate depiction of how the doors look through the remainder of the building. As you look back at northwest edition of the 1935 entrance, you can see that arched opening back here, and this is the original entrance to the building that had the historic light fixture and the blue ceiling. Here you see just beyond that, it transitions pretty quickly to modern office space. And unfortunately, the original corridors have been removed and the space is really pretty much an open volume for the interior. Here's an image looking up into the ceiling here. The original ceiling is intact and it doesn't look like there's much up there. But here you can see that in other locations, there's a tremendous amount of ductwork and utility hiding behind those ceilings. So that'll have to be dealt with as we look at investigate how the city and county are going to be reusing the space. Also want to point out just in terms of feasibility of communications of both plug loads and IT demand loads that the city and county would have. You can see this layout of electrical devices here is inadequate to meet their demands. So there'd be some pretty significant changes that would be required in the mechanical systems as well as electrical systems. Additional images of the first floor showing just the open spaces that are there now. The circulation patterns are somewhat evident as you see here, but the walls, the original wall construction is all gone. The original columns you see here, but they've all been furred out to accommodate presumably plumbing and electrical that's between floors. Here again, the original stairs have been modified. Some of the handrails, original handrails that were open have been either sealed within these new walls or removed. And then the handrails you can see here. The original windows that face south onto Broadway at the area of the flagpole remain, as do wainscoting finishes. But again, the ceilings have been dropped. This is an entrance that occurs on the northeast side of the 1935 edition. So facing the, looking out north of the building and the east side of the building. This was an addition that was, or an entrance that was cut in at some point. So it's a non-historic entrance, but cut into the historic materials, and you can see the aluminum storefront, kind of double entrance door that they've set up here. Again, restrooms have been pretty significantly modified in terms of ADA compliance. And some of that's okay, some of it will be changed to better meet the integrity, historic preservation aspects of the building. Other restrooms, there's, there has the original finishes, but there's no, due to room size, there's no ability to make ADA compliant modifications without some pretty significant alterations. Moving up to the second floor then, again, and continuing on with some of the impacts to the historic corridors. The column lines remain, but the corridor patterns are gone. Those original corridor patterns are gone. In some cases, you do get a sense of what they may have been, particularly in the post office, the original 1911 building, the second floor. That starts to show up a little bit more. But then again, the restrooms, these new modern restrooms were installed at some point with new finishes. So kind of a mixed match of historic and new generations in the building and impacts to the building. Again, plumbing fixtures have been altered in conjunction with keeping some of the historic finishes in some cases. And drinking fountains were randomly placed throughout the building, as well as electrical and IT communication. At that time, as phone systems, phone closets that were throughout the building. And again, on the second floor, the stairwells have been enclosed and some changes there. Ceiling heights have been dropped below the windows. And then modern doors have been installed to create these vestibule type areas for fire code purposes. One of the unique features of the second floor is the original federal courtroom. And this is looking at the entrance doors from the corridor side. There's actually a double pair of doors to enter the corridor, enter the courtroom. And these are leather-clad double swing doors. These are original to the building. But once you're inside the courtroom, you can see here the finishes, with the exception of the wainscoting in the room. The remainder of the room has been significantly altered. This is looking to the south elevation of the room, so you can see both those pairs of historic entrance doors. And the doors are in their original location, but the wall finishes and the ceiling have been altered pretty significantly to account for mechanical, electrical systems and acoustical treatments. And again, restrooms have been modified throughout the building. As we looked at it, we found that there were in the 1927-1935 building additions, not only were there terrazzo floor finishes in the original circulation corridors, but there were wood floor finishes in those areas that may have been the original office areas. To what degree these exist, we don't know. It's all covered with carpet, but we'll be looking at that further as we move forward. And this is just a sample image of what some of those typical offices have been modified to look like, including carpet, addition of wainscoting, modified window trims, and then of course the drop ceiling and wall finishes that are all non-historic finishes in additions to the building. Going to the third floor then, again, corridors have been significantly altered. Here's some of the original window openings in the historic corridor, but mechanical systems interrupt that, going to be a clear view of that corridor. Here you see those modern doors that have been installed for separation spaces and some of the more modern handrails that have been installed. This inset picture just indicates that there are some original floor finishes below some of these carpet tile floor finishes. More than likely, They were covered for sound acoustic reasons, but perhaps there's a way to bring those back in the future. And again, our original corridors and finishes were pretty altered to accommodate not only restrooms, modern restrooms, but mechanical, electrical systems, and kind of the drinking fountain convenience locations. Here are a couple of images of the third floor greenhouse, which is pretty intact for its space. The floor finishes in here are carpet, again over the concrete floor that was original to the space. There's the access into that greenhouse space here, so you can see the carpet finishes in there. In the handrails, fire sprinkler system, and how that integrates into the space is exposed. And then just to show some of the wall finishes are slightly damaged in terms of what we would expect to see in a public office, public space in the future. So we'll be looking at that as well. Just want to look at the building roof, show you some images up there. It's a ballasted roof system. Here you can see it with the gravel roof. The greenhouse, which is in actually very good condition. Here you can see the gravel roof, and looking back to the 1935 edition in the machine room over there. Here you see the 1957 edition, 1952 edition to the courtroom. This is the courtroom and those large windows that are in the courtroom. Here's some of the conditions for the original 1927 edition and the stonework up there and some of the cleaning and repointing efforts that have been made over time. Not ideal. They're using a silicone sealant in some of those more sky-facing mortar joints, which require repair. And then going to the courtyard and looking at that a little bit, here you see the loading dock in that 1952 edition and modifications that were there. These three windows are the original courtroom. Generally, it's just parking space, utilitarian parking space in that courtyard, serving the post office. There's a transformer and additional parking. Some trash. This is where the trash pickups are. This is a loading dock for the trash from the building, and then an entrance door into the 1952 edition. In some of those spaces. Even then, there's been some alterations to the 1952 edition. You can see here. And then again, the transformer and the electrical utility, so as they come into the building, take up a portion of that courtyard space. And then looking to the north side of the 1935 building, there's a cooler chiller plant, or cooling tower, I'm sorry. And there's another loading dock back there that enters the first floor of the building. So again, we'll be looking at all those components, not only in their service and utility to the building in terms of sustainability and energy use, energy conservation, but just how we can make the better use of this space. Just want to talk about some of the exterior conditions of the building then. Door variations, you can see post office doors. These are non-historic doors, a modern interpretation of the original doors. Aluminum storefront doors. This is on that northeast entrance that was cut in on the north 1935 annex to the building. So aluminum storefront doors there. And this is a aluminum storefront door on the east entrance into the building that is not ADA compliant that we'd be looking at dealing with. And then the original northwest entrance doors and light fixtures with the modern handrails. This is relatively a code compliant entrance. But again, I think that we'd be looking at the aluminum storefront doors and the integrity of that in terms of interpreting the building. And then here's another northwest entrance door. Here you see the original kind of protective element above the entry door, but aluminum storefront, aluminum handrails. And we'd be looking at that as well. This door doesn't meet ADA compliance, although it is a wheelchair accessible entrance into the building. And just to point out some other things we noticed on the building, some graffiti that's requires some additional cleaning and treatment, and then just some little bit of degradation in terms of these grills that have been placed over the basement windows. We'd be looking at that, and perhaps even removing these and what that may mean to these guardrails and what modifications might be necessary in order to protect the public from, reopen those windows and then protect the public at the same time. So here again, some of the windows in the basement have been infilled, and we'll be looking at returning those if possible in the future, and then opening some of these basement window openings that have been covered over, open those back up. This one, just wanted to point out, is the original, when the Forest Service was in the building, we had a couple of entrance doors and a stairwell right here. That there's actually 2 stairs that go up and down, and then 2 doors. Presumably this was the payroll office where traffic would circulate into payroll, pick up payroll checks. One side of the stairwell was going down through one entrance door and then back up the other side of the stair. So you'd be looking at those as a means to, again, open up the building and perhaps a means to interpret it as well. Just looking at the 1911 south elevation of the building and the post office there, and the offices above. The 1927 addition with the greenhouse and office building here. Turning the corner, then again, the 1927 edition, and further down, coming into the 1935 edition here in the far right, 1935 edition, and the north elevation of the 1935 edition. And then that's the west elevation of the 1935 edition, the courtroom edition in 1926, and the original building that dates to 1911. I know this is a lot of information, but it's an introduction into where we're going with the project, and you're going to be seeing a lot more of it, I think, as we move forward. A decision for the NPS acquisition is not expected for a while, so that potential turnover again wouldn't be till September of 2022. And city and county will be notified of that as that process kind of moves forward. And that's all I got. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions of Paul? That's the best tour I've ever had of that building. I used to go in there a lot when the Forest Service was there, but then they invoked the checks at the door and the pat downs and everything. I kind of stayed away after that, so it's interesting to see what's all there.
I was just wondering if it would be at some point possible to take a real tour. I mean, that was fantastic. That was a great overview. I was wondering if it was possible to get in at some point and tour the building as a commission.
Yes, I would like to think so. We don't have access to the building. It's controlled by GSA. And even as an architectural team, we're challenged with getting access to the building.
Oh, okay.
We'll just have to play that by ear.
All right.
But I hope that we all get access to the building, including the design team at some point.
Any other questions of Paul? Comments?
Will the post office remain in the building, or are they looking to move also?
The post office has sent out a postcard soliciting space from other entities in the community, but that doesn't mean that they're moving. So it's up in the air, and from what I understand, the post office moves at a glacial pace. So for our purposes and purposes of the direction of this planning effort, we're expecting that the post office will be a tenant for the foreseeable future. and kind of looking at that may change in the process of development, but it's really up to the post office to determine where they'll land.
Anyone else have comments, questions on this item? Well, thank you, Paul. That was a real good in-depth look at the entire space and to see how it grew over time. That's a pretty fascinating subject in and of itself. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to old business. I think there's nothing to report on either of these, but I will announce them. 6.1 Historic Covenant Subcommittee update. I don't think there's been any meetings on that. And is there any other thing that we know about in that at all, Elizabeth?
Not right now, no further updates.
Okay, I didn't think so, but I need to ask the question and get the answer. And 6.2 is Preservation Planning Subcommittee. I think the answer would be the same for that as well.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Anyone have a building that needs to be identified as part of our building watch item 6.3? Any hidden treasures out there that need to be watched?
Maybe this is sorry, this is Paul. Maybe it's a question for Elizabeth, but do you know the status of the vacated Missoula County Public Schools admin office?
All right.
I do not know the status of that, but I can certainly look into it for you and try to get an update to y'all.
Thank you.
Oh, and related to that, it's not historic anymore because they so completely changed, but I finally visited the area of Willard School recently, and I was dumbfounded at all the work that had happened there. And then not only that, but the addition of almost a 400-foot long solar fence that they put up so Northwestern Energy can get some solar energy from them. Any other buildings to be watched? Okay. We come to item 7, our HPO's staff report and project notification. Elizabeth, you're on.
All righty, so it's a fairly brief staff report as well this time around. So the city of Missoula has renewed our membership with the National Trust for Historic Preservation Leadership Forum. Again, we have an organizational membership. That means that if any commission members want to join, you can do so at a discounted rate of $95. There's also discounted rates for conference registration and other events and activities that the trust offers. Send me an email for our organizational member if you are interested in doing so. We're also rolling into conference season for the National Trust. So this year's Pass Forward National Trust Annual Conference will be taking place virtually, November 2nd to November 5th. Registration has already opened, and the early bird rate is available for anyone who chooses to register prior to October 5th. Additional things I've been working on over the past couple months include getting the historic preservation section of the city website updated to ensure that the information is correct. That includes updating all the forms, making sure that it reflects my information for accuracy for the public. We're also working on a new district map, which will be uploaded soon. That'll include the Moon Randolph Ranch. That's long been missing from our district maps. I've updated the PDF that lists our individually listed properties so that they include links directly to the National Register nominations. Again, trying to kind of streamline the process for the public to get that information. A longer term project that I've been chipping away at has been creating an updated inventory of our historic districts. Between on the ground survey work and combing through the many demolition permits that have been processed over the years, I hope to develop a better understanding of the current state of our historic districts. Since we met last, I've kicked off my work with the Lalonde Ranch and the Moon Randolph Homestead. In mid-June and again in mid-July, I sat in on meetings with the Lalonde Ranch Strategic Work Group. On July 14th, I had the opportunity to go do a meet and greet and get a wonderful site tour of the Moon Randolph Homestead. And I've been attending steering committee meetings with that group as well. For Heritage Missoula, they have, as of the end of June, installed the second of 9 interpretive wayfinding kiosks. This one was installed at the Missoula Art Park and focuses on Missoula's arts heritage. The other kiosk was installed in October of 2020 and can be seen at the Missoula Public Library, with more kiosks to come in the future. We had one request for consultation from HPC members on the John R. Tool House. That's 1005 Gerald Avenue. Steve Adler agreed to conduct a site visit to assess the porch integrity. And then last, but certainly not least, staff has reviewed and signed off on 3 demolition permits for 441 Woodworth, 1712 South 14th Street West, and 4850 North Reserve Street. None of the properties were individually listed. None were included in a historic district. And that wraps up my staff report.
Yeah. Any questions of Elizabeth regarding the staff report? Thank you, Elizabeth. Looks like you've jumped on a lot of items there. And what did we figure? You've been here almost 4 months now?
Yeah, 4 months.
Okay, wow. Time flies. All right. All right. Item 8, any comments from board members? Any observations?
This is Kathy. I have a question. When will we see another update on the Fort Hospital?
As of right now, I don't actually have any updates on that. They, I don't believe, are coming to the HPC again until they get the actual process rolling for the project. So I'll let you know when I know.
Okay, thank you.
So they've not filed anything officially with the city yet to start the process with the city. Is that correct?
As far as I understand it, that's correct.
Okay. Any other board member comments? Item 9, announcements, news, and upcoming events. Jim and Paul, I know you guys are involved in the conference coming up at the end of September in Butte.
That's right. A blast from the past. Mining Montana history. Check it out. Go on to the website. Montana History Conference is coming up. It's September 23rd through the 25th in Butte. And the reason Kent mentions that is A&E is going to be presented a Heritage Keepers Award, the Heritage Guardian Award.
Yeah.
In the state of Montana.
Anyone else have announcements of or news items or upcoming events? All right. Do I hear a motion to adjourn? I guess our next meeting will be, what's the date? What's the date? Quickly. Next meeting will be,
September 1st.
oh, the very first day of September. Okay. Great. All right. So we will reconvene on September 1st for the Historic Preservation Commission. Do I have your motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much, all. See you next month.
All right.